It ain't about that. I mean, it's not about that.
Okay, so what are we talking about? I know. The Crankle know.
We're talking Anonymous for the Voiceless versus Joey Carbstrong. Or is it Joey Carbstrong versus Anonymous for the Voiceless? But it's round two. Round two, or maybe this is round three? I don't really know. I guess this is round three if you include Joey's response, right? And how many more of these can we possibly take?
If you're complaining about that, well, just get ready because we've got a lot more hour-long plus videos that we want to make.
Something to look forward to.
Yeah, I can't wait for that either. Maybe you could just give us a summary, Cranky.
Anonymous for the Voiceless got a big $1.5 million grant from a funder. An AV engaged in problematic behavior, which drew the attention of said funder, who then wanted answers to the questions as to how his money was being spent, as it seemed like things weren't up on the up and up. AV didn't give him the answers that he wanted, which is sketchy on their part. The funder wanted a board of directors of his choosing implemented, which is sketchy on his part. The funder sent in Joey Carbstrong to try to negotiate the login informations to AV's bank accounts, which is sketchy on Joey's part. And the sketchiness grows and grows, and if you really want to break it down, feel free to do so in my last video on this subject. Okay.
So it's the war between moneybags and moneybags in the movement. It gets quite nasty, don't it?
We've supported you, Joey Carbstrong, equally. We have promoted the fuck out of you from day one. Your outreach, we've always talked highly of you. I've always backed you up because a lot of people within AV say negative things about you. I've always backed you up. Oh, Joey only comes to the cubes as a celebrity. He doesn't even follow the cube structure, which is true, actually.
And also his involvement has always been attending the cube, recording his own outreach and then posting it online.
Yeah, which equally promotes Joey Carbstrong.
Right. So why do you think Joey didn't do a video and he did the document instead?
Because him standing in front of a camera, showing his face, trying to hold composure while he's communicating absolute absurdities, trying to tell people how he's in fact entitled to have our bank login password. You're a coward. Well,
$4,000 is a lot of money that you can live comfortably with.
Yeah.
Every month. So that's not that modest.
No, that's not that modest considering that's only one of his source. When you've got YouTube dollars, and I know
I'd
that
be very happy with that much money.
He's making a significant amount of money from YouTube.
Exactly.
And he's also receiving money from the donor.
Yeah.
It's like, how modest are you really living as a single solo individual activist, really?
Yeah. He loves to say modest. Now he has decided to share his Patreon after the video that we did. Now we know $4,000 a month. It's not that modest. That's actually pretty fucking good. Plus YouTube, I don't know how much he would make.
And that's USD because Patreon's a US platform.
Right. YouTube and then PayPal and then who knows how much from the donor he gets, right? So like what's your idea of modest? Because that sounds pretty fucking good to me.
Why would we trust you? What reason do we have to trust you? You're lying to everybody involved, anyone listening, anyone involved in this whole story. You are lying to them by claiming that we are not willing to be transparent here.
Exactly.
Well, this is all entertaining or sad, depending how you think about it. But there are some movement issues here. For example, this battle of the giants, maybe AV are not going to survive it. And there's a question mark about whether they should. Certainly in their present form. They are supposed to be a grassroots group, but they clearly see themselves as a multinational organisation. And it seems as though the people on the ground, the ones in the cubes, they're not seeing much of these vast sums.
Joey said a number of AV groups said they hadn't received the AV fund. There were people that were reaching out to this donor saying that AV says they have an AV fund, but we never received it. So we did have this available from the start of last year. And many of our organizers still don't even know about this. And whose fault is that? It's their own fault if they don't follow the protocol that we have. They don't watch our regular live streams. They don't check in with the posts that we have in our organizers group.
So there is an AV fund, but only from the start of 2019, and they've been in existence for about 4 years now. There's always been rumours and problems about the lack of trickle down. You know, there's an organisation here who's getting millions of dollars, and the activists don't seem to be getting much of it. And they're saying it's the activists' fault because they're not paying attention. It's not as though they, as the head HQ as it were, can't tell them about this fund. It's the activists' fault for not knowing about it.
So if they contacted Joey, which I doubt, they contacted their donor and they said, we didn't receive it, it's because either they didn't know about it or they didn't fit the criteria, because we didn't set it up so that as soon as you open a chapter, we're going to send you money.
So the AV chapters don't get the money once they're formed. So how do they afford the laptops and the sound systems? Isn't that what this money is for? What else is it for? Seems a bit odd to me, that. And it seems appropriate that Paul Bashir seems togged out to go and raid a bank at this point and just check out his reaction to how this information has been divulged.
You had to be active, and you had to be an active organizer or a chapter for at least 6 months to be able to receive the AV fund. And many would have been able to let them know that they have received the AV fund.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the primary function of AV is to run the cubes of truth. There seems to be significant barriers in the way of that. Like, if you don't know about it in the first place, you don't get any funding, and then you've got to be up and running and at it for 6 months before you're eligible for the funding anyway. How does this make sense if you've got a headquarters who are supposed to facilitate cubes of truth, and yet they don't seem to make the money available? Where is this money going? What's it being used for?
We didn't have one account specifically for this donor and then one account for other stuff. AV has only one account, so all the money that we receive from merch sale or public donations, and then the bigger donations from this specific donor, everything was going into the same account, and all the expenses were coming out of the same account.
All the expenses paid from 3 primary sources. You've got public donations, you've got merchandise sales, and the AV stuff is not cheap. I know that. And then you've got this big donor. And yet there's still these barriers to the actual cubes getting hold of it. Cranky said there was something, what was his word? Sketchy. I think it's dodgy.
So the next thing Joey mentioned was the touring campaign budget. He mentioned $300,000 a year. In a year when travel was restricted because of COVID, they also never readjusted this travel budget to suit the current situation of all travel being restricted. So yes, the budget that we asked for was $300,000 for an entire year of 4 and 5. So it was going to be between 4 and 5 people traveling full time for a whole year.
$300,000. For 4 or 5 people traveling all year. What for, me wonders? Is it to train the cubes? Organize the cubes? Attend the cubes yourself? You're going to travel the world to do that? If it's a question of training, that presumably is done by Zoom nowadays, and probably will be when all this is over. So $300,000 to send 5 people around the world to parachute into these countries, presumably, and countries in which there are already animal advocates. The next clip contains some ableist language. It's also interesting in that Paul Bashir is trying to suggest that Carbstrong was part and parcel of an attempt to take over AV and make it into a intersectional and also a welfare organization because they wanted a board of directors or trustees. It's interesting that because presumably the direction of the organization would be dependent on the values of the people who were appointed as those trustees. And since Paul and Lascelles would appoint them, there shouldn't really be a problem there. But nevertheless, the end section is interesting here because it says, do you want food at a cube of truth? This is Paul challenging Joey. I don't think that's up to Paul or Joey. That's up to the cube. If they want food at a cube of truth, so what? It's up to them. They're running the cube. It's their cube.
Matthew and the others were pushing for a board. And the fact that you can't see what that means is so fucking crazy to me. It's obvious that the board is designed to push me and Asal out of the way things are operated within AV. In other words, they're trying to control AV. They're trying to take over the way that we do things and run it differently. So this is what you're supporting, Joey. The notion that we should have a board which would completely make us intersectional, welfarist, and focusing on absolute nonsense compared to what we do now, which is holding people accountable for why they stab animals to death with no reason, targeting the demand. It would no longer be that. The screens would show different stuff. There wouldn't be graphic imagery. We would have food served at our events. Is that what you're behind, Joey? You think that we should have food served at the Cube of Truth?
The next and almost final clip contains a real movement issue, the issue of wages and paid staff. And it's been an issue since, well, for me, since the 1980s. Now, most of the grassroots people of the 1980s, they would get around this idea of how do you become a full-time activist by being full-time unemployed, which obviously is more difficult now than it was. But the advantage then, and also the radical solution, if you like, is the fact that the government then would fund the activism. So it was a win-win situation. The more people you've got earning, the more taxes they're paying, and then the more vivisection and everything else that is being funded through those taxes. So having a job of any kind isn't great from that respect, including having a job within the animal rights movement. But it is an issue that we need to have an adult conversation about, because people do need to be able to make a living, obviously, and it presumably is no longer the case that you can just be on the dole like we used to be. But there you go.
Stop shaming people because they make money off their activism that they're doing. If they're hired by an animal rights organization, stop shaming them and just try to make that happen for yourself. Doesn't everyone want that as an animal rights activist? Doesn't everyone want that? Isn't that like the dream job?
I guess people are just expressing their own self-hatred because they can't imagine themselves or for others like wanting such great things for the world, really. Because how great is it that animal rights activists actually have the flow of money directed at them in this world? Shouldn't that be how it is?
No, the money apparently is supposed to go to non-vegan companies. That's how it works.
Interesting how Sal talks about this issue in terms of a dream job, whereas Paul seems to be putting his psychology degree or whatever it was to use by claiming it's something to do with self-hatred or something like that, which is well bizarre. But Asal says right at the end, it's a good thing. Well, again, that's a bit shallow. It's not as simple as that, because you're supposed to be giving your money to the non-vegan company, or you could be working for an animal rights group and giving your money to vivisectors. There's no pure land in this respect. There's no easy answer. Just because you like a job and you see yourself as a bit of a careerist doesn't mean that you can present such a shallow view of things, I don't think. It's a bit more complicated than that. Now, finally, the final bit, and I shall just let you all, without comment, just wallow in the delicious irony of this. So, thanks for watching it, Earthlings, and I'll see you again. Bye for now.
Demanding people change to be like you. That's not accepting people for their differences, and that's not allowing an inclusive movement. That's not cultivating an inclusive movement. That's cultivating carbon copies. And Joey, you just sold yourself to that. You played yourself into that. And if you don't see that, there's nothing that can help you.